It's February 9th, 2024. We are at the log cabin in Smithland with the Livingston County Historical Society. Doris Cothron is here to speak with us. She's a lifetime resident of Livingston County, and she has been a teacher for how many years?
I taught for 39 years.
39 years. She's also involved in many community and church activities as well. So Doris, give us some background on where you grew up, who your parents were, who you married, your children.
Well, I grew up at Lola, and as an old Livingston County saying is, across the river. And my parents were James H. Crawford and Dorothy Gillen Crawford, and went to elementary school at Lola and high school, Livingston Central High School, and then to Murray State. I have one sibling, a sister, Charlotte Holloman of Marion, and one niece, and then a great nephew, and that makes up my family, my immediate family. And but I spent all of my time in Livingston County except for the times when I was away at school at Murray, and that's where I grew up.
What year did you graduate from Livingston Central?
I graduated in 1966, and then went on to Murray State University, and graduated from there in 1970, and received an assistantship from the English department at Murray State to teach there. And so I taught at Murray State English 101, 102 for a year, and worked on my Master of Arts in English. And later on, I went back and got my rank 1 in education. And that's my educational background.
What year did you start teaching in Livingston County?
I started in the fall of 72. My first year of teaching after I left Murray was at Union County. And then I became engaged to my husband, Tom Cothron, and I received a job in Livingston County, and that's where I've taught ever since. And then about the last 25 years of my teaching, I taught for West Kentucky Community College, and also I taught for Madisonville Community College night classes. And that kind of makes up my 39 years or so. Of course, after I retired, I went back 2 or 3 times to fill in or to teach for 2 or 3 more years or whatever, according to the needs of the school system. When they invited me, I went.
So have you always lived in the county?
I've always lived in the county, except for in 1954, Mother and Dad, like several Kentuckians, moved to Chicago to make money to build a house. They didn't want to go in debt. So we moved to Chicago, and I lived there until January of 1955. And then we moved back, and I started the school at Alexander Graham Elementary School in Chicago. Then in high school, between my sophomore and junior years, my dad, who was a farmer as well as a construction worker, had a job in Evansville. So Mother Charlotte and I moved up there and spent the summer with him. And so for a time, I thought I was not going to get to come back and go to Livingston Central. I thought they were going to stay there. But the good Lord had other plans, and we moved back to Kentucky. And I went to Livingston Central all 4 years of my high school.
And where did you meet your husband?
Tommy and I, we got acquainted in 1962. We both went to Livingston Central. We were both freshmen at Livingston Central in 1962. And so we went to high school together. But when college time came, I went to Murray State, and he went off to the University of Kentucky. Then later on, while we started dating in my graduate year of school at Murray.
So what accomplishments, awards, teaching awards, things like that have you received in the past? Anything?
Well, I was named Teacher of the Year at Livingston Central on 2 different occasions. The Paducah Chamber of Commerce named me a Golden Apple teacher at one point in my teaching, and I don't know. I can't think of other things. I don't know.
Well,
But those stand out.
right. As far as students, can you tell us any funny stories about students?
Oh, I could tell you several stories. I love my kids. And I call them my kids because Tom and I don't have children, so I just loved on everybody else's children. Um, I'll never forget some of the escapades that my students planned, organized very well, and pulled off on me. And I know one day I was coming back from class and I entered room 3 at Livingston Central when it was at Burna. And lo and behold, my entire classroom was turned backwards. Every chair was in a straight row but backwards. And my desk had been moved to the other end of the room. And the kids, of course, had this look on their faces, we wonder what she'll do. So when I walked in, I just walked to the other end of the room and started teaching. And it was a fun experience. But before the class was over, I said, now students, you've pulled your prank. Now let's straighten this room back up. And so another time I went to my room, and when I walked in, it was Halloween. And the students had hung an effigy over my desk. On another occasion, they had hung my chair to the rafters above the room. Livingston Central at that time had open, I guess, steel rafters that were open to the room, and they had hung my chair there. On another occasion, I went and walked into my room, and I'll never forget these two girls who planned this. They planned it down to the nth degree, Lisa Loretz and Sherry Belt. It was pink day. And everybody in the room had pink on. And all the paper that they had on their desk was pink. And they all had pink pencils. And so it was just something to throw me. And but I always found their pranks refreshing. And sometimes I knew they were trying me to see how far they could go. But they were not going bad. They were just being themselves. They were just being creative young people. Another time I walked into the room, and this really got to me. I walked in. Normally, I would say, "Good, hello, students. How are you all doing today?" And they would respond, you know, at will. And then we'd get down to class. And then, on that particular day, however, when I walked in and did that, no one responded as they normally did. And all of a sudden, I saw the hand of a student go up. And I said, yes. And she said, "Mrs. Cothron, may I rise to speak?" And so she rose very stiffly to the side of her desk and addressed me. "Good morning, Miss Cothron. I'm glad to see you today." That went on the whole time. And you can imagine, I mean, my room was, I tried to have a rapport with my students to where they were free to ask questions and to say what they thought about an issue that we were discussing with literature or whatever. But you can imagine my being set back and being more or less tied up. I didn't know what to do. When I would call on one to respond to a point in the lesson, it would raise their hand. "Miss Cothron, may I rise to the side of my desk?" This went on the entire hour. And at one point, I said, "Students, what is going on here?" Because I wasn't free. And their looks remained very Puritan, very strict and stern. And finally, I said, "I can't stand this. I can't stand this." And then it continued. They did not break this trance that they had put over that entire classroom. And when it got through and it was about time for the tone to sound to end the class, I said, "Listen, you students, come back and be your normal selves tomorrow." And I knew it was a prank that they were pulling on me. They're seeing how far. But I was so amazed at how well organized and plan this event had become and how they transformed that classroom into a Puritan classroom of maybe the 1800s, you know. I was absolutely astounded, and it just kind of just tied me up. And then when the tone sounded, all those kids went, "We're so glad this is over, Miss Cothron." And we all had a good laugh, but they pulled that on me. Another time in teaching here in Smithland, after the high school moved to Smithland, I came in one day and my podium was gone and my books were gone. And of course, I needed a podium to lean on. That was my crutch. And come find out, 2 or 3 of the boys had taken my podium and stuck it out the window. And they had also dropped all of my books that I taught from my desk out the window. And of course, when I started laughing because I knew it was another prank, and I knew the nature of my kids. They were always so sweet. Finally, I found out who did it. And they went and retrieved my podium, and they retrieved all my books, and they put them all back in place. And one of the students who was an instigator of that is a lawyer here in town, Billy McGee, and another one was Alan Smith. He was a part of that. He was always had a mischievous grin on his face. And then there was another one. But they would try me, and I enjoyed them. I enjoyed them so much, but they could be very funny when they put their heads to it. I call it the innocence of the youth, and that's the way it was.
You have an amazing singing talent, and you belonged to a quartet for many years and made recordings. Tell us about that.
Well, I started singing when I was 3 or 4 years old. My mother encouraged me, and she would even write little songs for me to get up. I went to church at New Union General Baptist Church near Lola. Nickname for that is Ditney, and that's another piece of history there. But she would coach me to sing, to get up in front of the church and sing at that early age. And I kept on singing. I liked to sing. And then when my sister came along, we sang as a duet for many, many years there at the church. And I always wanted to sing in a quartet because I know Mother and Dad would go to quartet singings. And we'd have at Ditney, they would have the once a month singing there every now and then because it went around from church to church here in Livingston County. And I always thought, oh, I'd love to sing in a quartet. And but that didn't happen. Well, I was singing a girls' quartet while I was in high school. And I sang in the choir while I was in high school. And then when I married, my husband and I had been married about 7 years. And I never knew that he was interested in music at all. He had never told me anything about that. I just didn't know that. I'd sat by him in church for years and never heard him hum a tune. Came in one day and he had a sound equipment sitting in the living room. And he felt the call to start a quartet. And so we sang in a quartet. It was New Directions at first, and then later on it became Canaan Land Quartet. And we sang for about 25 years in the 5 different states around when invited. And that was a blessing to meet the people as well as to share the gospel through song. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And
do you still sing?
Still sing. I sing in the choir, Southline Baptist Temple. And on occasion, we sing in a quartet there, my husband and I. And on occasion, I'll sing solo every now and then. That's where it is now.
Well, looking back on your life now that you have retired, what would you do differently, if anything?
I don't know that I would do anything differently because I always wanted to teach. Even when I was a little girl, I can remember one day that I went in, we lived in an old pre-Civil War house back in the center of the farm. And I remember one day going in and gathering all my dolls and all my stuffed animals and taking them out and lining them up at a sugar tree at the base of a sugar tree and teaching them all a lesson that day, or else having church with them. I used to have church when I was a little girl. And I always wanted to teach from the time I was in grade school until, well, it never left me, that desire to teach. And I'm thankful God allowed me to do that because I enjoyed it. And I don't know that I do anything differently. God seemed to direct my life, and I give him the glory. Because it's been good, been very good.
What do you love about Livingston County, your home?
I love Livingston County because it's such a beautiful county. It's hills and it's fields and it's rivers and all of that are just intriguing, and they're beautiful. And it's unique, very unique when you look at the history of Livingston County and all the shoreline we have, you know, the lakes and the canal and the rivers and the creeks and all that, you know. It's a beautiful county. And naturally, I love its people because I'm one of them. And I'm proud to call myself a girl from Livingston County. And I'm very proud of it. And its history has always intrigued me. That, too, causes me to like Livingston County or to appreciate it. And glad God put me here.
Are there any people that you would like to mention that kind of stand out through the years that were unique to this county or were interesting?
First of all, I mentioned my mother because she was the best teacher I ever had. Because when she would teach me to do something, she lived by that herself. She's taught by model, and she taught as well as by model. Naturally, she did a lot of talking and teaching to me. I'll never forget going out in the backyard one day, and she was saying that she was telling me something concerning math. I don't know whether she was counting something or whatever, and she said, well, 1,000 is the same as 1,000. And I couldn't grasp it at that time, and I just got so frustrated. She said, Doris Ray, she said, you will learn eventually all of this. You'll understand it. But now, she always pushed me, and of course, Dad was right there too. But she wanted me to go to college because she never had that opportunity. She never had the opportunity to even go to high school. And so she pushed me and she taught me how valuable an education could be to me. And I treasure that. I refer to the faculty that was at Livingston Central in the 60s as the golden faculty. Mr. Krotzer, Ms. Mahan, Ms. Baxter, and all of those were good teachers. And you never had a free day in Ms. Mahan's class. We were busy the whole time. If it was a free day at Livingston Central, as we began to have in later years of teaching, that was unusual. So we were busy the whole time. And and Mr. Kenneth Harden, too, was the principal at the time. And I in my mind, they are the golden faculty of Livingston Central High School because they taught me so much and steered me in the right direction. So
how do you spend your time now?
Oh, goodness, I'm wondering now how I ever had time to teach. Now, I love crocheting. I love reading. And when I have time, I love to write. And I thoroughly enjoy following my husband around on the farm, even though I'm retired and I won't say I'm an old lady. I won't admit that yet. But I love following him around and in the hay fields and riding the four-wheeler and all of that. And I like sewing. And but I love reading. That's my number one hobby.
Do you read historical accounts?
I read historical. I can get lost in history, and especially the history books we've put out here, the two, History of Livingston County. I can sit down at night and start to read about various people in the county, and I think, oh, I've heard of them. Let me read about them. And I can just get lost in that, and before I know it, the hours have passed. I love history books like Jefferson's Nephews because they're about Livingston County. And I love others as well. But I also love good fiction, and I love biographies. I guess my least favorite is science fiction because it's not reality, and I don't I can get into it if I'm in the right mood. And I used to teach when we had phase elective English. That's years ago at Livingston Central. Well, I taught a class in science fiction, and I enjoyed it. But I love to read all of that, all of those genres.
Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't covered today?
I don't think of anything. I thoroughly enjoy history, and I have done tours here in Livingston County for students, for visitors from the American Queen, the Delta Queen. They used to stop in Smithland and take on water. And I can remember being down on the riverfront, and I know Miss Frankie Champion would bring her quilts and her crocheted work and display or to sell if the visitors. And I thoroughly enjoyed taking them around the town and meeting various people from various states. Those were good days in Smithland. And also used to the quilters, when they'd have their quilt convention at Paducah, they would bus them up to the Amish country. And they would schedule them a tour of Smithland when they found out that they could have a walking tour of this town. And that I enjoyed doing, and sharing the history of our town and our county. Another thing we had at Livingston Central years and years ago, I know there were 3 or 4 teachers of us had this idea, because the state was pushing a term called learning event, where you did an extensive event to allow students to experience and as well as learn about various things. And I know that Debbie DeWeese, Vicki Conyer, Mary Pat Wyatt, and I got together and started making plans to do what we called a Heritage Day at the high school. And it lasted all day long. And we brought in all kinds of craftsmen, business people. We brought in people from every walk of life. We filled the rooms at the high school with people who would come in and talk to the students about various things. We filled the yard with what we called stations. One station, the kids could gather around and watch apple cider being made. Another station, I remember Cecil Long brought his wagon and his team to town for the kids to take a ride in the wagon and all of that. We had another station with making brooms and things like that. All kinds of crafts. That was such a day. And of course, not only did I teach English at Livingston Central, but at that point I had become also writing resource director or person. And I reserved the end of the day. We teachers reserved the end of the day for the students to write about their day, to write about what they had gained from all the experiences. And by the way, every student in that building, we scheduled it also to where every student in Livingston Central took a bus tour of Smithland. And I was the director, and I shared with them everything I could think of on that bus tour. And we went all over the town seeing historical spots, and I shared stories with them from history. That afternoon, late, in the last hour of the day, when I asked them to write out, and I collected every single paper that was written, and I read every single one because I wanted to know. The response that I had from those students, or that we teachers had from those writings, taught us one thing. Students need to know where they come from. They need to know the history of their county. And I got so many responses where the students would say, now I am proud of who I am and where I came from, because they did not know about the history of the county. And but they had learned, they'd had a peek into what a rich area this is and what was surrounding them, and they didn't know. That was such a rewarding day. Another day we had was called River Day, where we celebrated the rivers. And it was an all-day learning event. And we had stations set up down on the riverfront, and we had also things going on at high school. And all the students got to eat lunch down at the riverfront. and they got to go through a math station, a writing station, an English station. And I know I had a little girl from Sweden who was in my class at the time because she was an exchange student. And her piece that she wrote as a result of that day, she was sitting there at the edge of the Ohio River in my writing unit or station, and she wrote, "How interesting to know that the waters that flow along at my feet may have also washed the shores of my homeland of Sweden." I'll never forget that. And it makes cold chills run over me now when I think about what the kids gained from that day as well. Another day we tried doing a Shakespeare day. That was in another year. And the whole school got a dose of Shakespeare. And we teachers even acted out a few things. These were really good days.
Sounds like you were an amazing teacher and the students loved you.
I loved them, and I loved sharing with them.
Doris, we have a fort here in Smithland called Fort Smith. Can you tell us what your involvement with that was?
Yes, that was a great project as well. That had a great effect on our town as well, I sincerely believe. I forget his name, he was an archaeologist at Murray, professor of archaeology, but he wrote up a program to involve Livingston Central in exploring Fort Smith, which of course is one of the two civil forts that we have here in the town from the Civil War. And Fort Starr, the smaller of the two forts, sits right on the hill behind Livingston Central High School. So we had a wonderful source for history there to teach the kids. And so Vicki Conyer and Debbie DeWeese and the other teachers, well, the entire faculty was involved in this. And I know my part of the project was to let the students write and do research. And I turned my part of it into a year-long process whereby the kids did research and wrote. We wrote and rewrote and edited and did everything. I assigned each student a particular area of Smithland's role in the Civil War during that time. And each student spent time researching, and plus Murray State provided us materials as well, and we searched on our own for materials, and each student wrote a research paper in essence about the topic. For instance, one wrote about the boats, one wrote about the encampments at the foot of the hill where Livingston Central now sits, and those are two examples. And then I read every single research paper and followed their research and read their research to the extent to make sure they had used it correctly. And then at the end of the year, we published that in a fairly thick booklet of all of their research that they had done with regard to the town. And that was enlightening and very interesting. And of course, during all of that, I took them on walking tours and that sort of thing of the town, so that they not only were writing about it and searching about it in books, but they were walking by the site and they were seeing the site and we were talking more about it. And that was a great project for our entire school. And of course, we were also publishing in the local newspaper news about what we were doing. The townspeople became involved, and I tend to think that it's because of that the left-hand section of the Smithland Cemetery, which is a very historic place, was cleaned up. I will backtrack here a minute. When Tom and I first married, moved to Smithland, and I was always an adventuresome kid, and that's remained with me all my life. I would get out and walk the town to find out and what was going on and what was where and everything. And many times I'd take my camera and take pictures along my walking tour. But then one day I wandered up the cemetery hill, and I was looking around, just walking, looking, thinking. Looked down over in the woods. I was at the top of the hill and I looked over to the right. And there among all the trees, I spotted a tombstone, a monument. And I thought, what is that? And of course, I'd also learned firsthand that when I would mention the Civil War in Smithland and was there not a fort here, I never got much of a response from people. And they didn't seem to know that much about it or didn't care to share. Anyhow, I walked down into the woods and began to walk through the vines and everything else and was discovering more tombstones, more stones. And I thought, what is this? And then later on, I learned that this was where black people were buried. This was the black portion of the cemetery. And it had been allowed to grow up. And I found that very sad. But after Livingston Central had this project with Murray State University and did the archaeological digs, and they even built a theater down over the hill from the cemetery in the woods there where performance could take place, and we dreamed of that. The townspeople were hearing about all that we were doing with Murray State and that the students were doing here. And suddenly, I don't know whether it was just the timing or what, but those woods began to disappear. And today, when you go up to Smithland Cemetery, you see all of that cleared off, and you see all those stones that were there. And I thought, goodness, the students really impacted the county, and the county worked along with the students ultimately. Marvelous, marvelous project that happened. I also remember my students wrote a walking tour booklet of Smithland. That was before we did the fort project, and I have my students assign them a building in the town, and they would go out and go. They had to go visit it, and they had to do a little research, write up little short snippets of narrative about a particular building, like the Gower House or the Bush House, or the Brandstetter House or the courthouse or whatever. I remember one day I was sitting after school, I was staying after school grading papers. All of a sudden, here came this young man in, and he said, Miss Cothron, I found a hole in the back of the old bank. Let's go break in. And of course I said, are you sure? He said, yes, we can climb up to this hole and we can go in. So I said, okay, let's go. So we went down there, and his name was I believe it was Johnny. But anyhow, Johnny and I climbed up on all these brick that had poured off from the broken wall in the back of the old bank. And we went in there and we toured the upstairs and the downstairs, at a peril to our lives in essence. And we learned so much and saw so much inside that old bank. And oh, he was so excited about his little paragraph that was going to go into the walking tour. We published the walking tour booklet, and Miss Ruth Powell, who was the secretary of the town, she sent it off to anybody who would write in here from other states wanting to know about Smithland and that type of thing. And she would receive several communications like that, inquiring about our little historic town. And she'd always mail that little booklet off to them. And later on, she may have mailed some of our little Civil War book off to various people. But those are also two very important memories that I have of my teaching, and what a difference how communities can work with schools and schools work with communities and make a difference. But I'll never forget those.
We thank you, Doris, for being with us today and giving us a peek into your years of teaching and your life.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that very much.